What if one small moment could shatter everything you've spent your entire life building? Diddy's world had always been one of glitz, glamour, and power. As one of the most influential figures in the music industry, he had it all. The fame, the fortune, the respect, and the envy of his peers. But on that one fateful afternoon, everything started to unravel. All it took was one unexpected event, one shocking testimony in a courtroom, to change the course of his life forever. It began like any other day in the bustling world of entertainment, but the news that Britney Spears, his former bandmate and close collaborator, had been called to testify in a legal case against him sent shockwaves throughout the industry. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as the world waited to hear what she would say. But nobody was prepared for the bombshell that would drop next. The moment Britney walked into the courtroom, all eyes were on her. Clad in a simple, but elegant dress, her presence commanded attention. The former pop princess, whose star had once shone brighter than most, was now seated on the witness stand, ready to spill secrets that would change everything. There was a murmur in the crowd. Many fans had been speculating for weeks about what might happen, but this was something no one could have foreseen. Allegedly, Diddy isn't the man we all thought he was, Britney began, her voice steady but carrying a weight of hidden emotions. The room fell silent. The words hung in the air, as if they were too powerful to comprehend. Many fans believe that the bond between Diddy and Britney had always been more than just business, it was friendship, or so it seemed. They had shared the stage, created music together, and even built a legacy. But what if everything was a facade? What if Monique actually said this? What if the pressure of fame, the greed, and the industry's toxic side had forced them all into a world they couldn't escape? The rumors had been swirling for weeks, whispers about Diddy's alleged behavior, the darkness hidden behind the flashing lights. But hearing it from Britney herself, someone who had been so close to him for years, was a revelation that hit harder than anyone could have anticipated. As Britney continued her testimony, her words painted a picture of a different Diddy than the world had known. She spoke of manipulative tactics, broken promises, and a sense of betrayal. Allegations of emotional and financial exploitation resurfaced, shocking not just Diddy's closest circle but also the public. Was this really the Diddy everyone had admired for years? Did he use you? Was there more to the story than what we saw on the surface? A reporter asked after the testimony concluded. Britney paused for a moment, the weight of the question clearly affecting her. The pressure of her past relationships and the scars of her own public struggles seemed to have built up to this point. "I'm just telling the truth," Britney said, her eyes locking with the camera. Her voice trembled, but there was no doubt in it. She had chosen to speak out, to share what she had buried for so long. Diddy's camp immediately issued a statement, vehemently denying all allegations. "This is nothing but a smear campaign," a spokesperson claimed. "The truth will come out, and those trying to bring him down will regret it." But for Diddy, the damage was done. The courtroom drama was just the beginning. In an instant, his carefully crafted public persona was under attack. His image as a mogul, a trailblazer, and a man of integrity was now in question. Fans, reporters, and industry insiders alike began to wonder, was the man behind Bad Boy Records really the icon they had all believed in? And as the legal proceedings unfolded, the question on everyone's mind remained, could this crisis be the end of Diddy's reign as one of the biggest names in music? As Diddy sat alone in his office later that evening, staring out at the New York skyline, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. His empire, built on years of hard work and sacrifice, seemed to be slipping through his fingers. He had been blindsided. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a battle for his life, his legacy, and everything he had fought for. His phone buzzed with messages, but he didn't pick it up. He wasn't ready to face the world just yet. The news was everywhere. Twitter was exploding with reactions, memes, and opinions flooding every corner of social media. Fans who had once idolized him were now divided. Some defended him, claiming that this was just a plot to ruin his career. Others, however, were already turning their backs. What if Diddy really did cross a line? Some fans wondered aloud. The questions were piling up, and the answers didn't come easy. Diddy was left to wonder how everything had gone so wrong, and why someone like Britney, someone he once trusted, was now standing against him in the most public way imaginable. In the days that followed, Diddy made only a few public appearances, but the damage was evident. His friends, colleagues, and even family members began to question what was happening behind closed doors. His supporters were growing fewer by the day, while critics began to pile on. But in the midst of it all, Diddy knew one thing: he had to fight back. He couldn't let this false narrative define him, but doing so would take more than just words. It would take time, careful strategy, and the courage to face his darkest secrets, secrets that he knew would eventually come to light. Diddy's world had just crashed, but this was only the beginning. He was about to embark on a journey that would either destroy him or redefine everything he had built. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about fame anymore. It was about survival. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the screen faded to black, viewers were left with a single question: what would Diddy do next? Would he rise from the ashes, or would he be consumed by the very rumors that had torn his world apart? Only time would tell. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Diddy's story was always one of triumph over adversity. From the outside, his life seemed like a carefully constructed masterpiece. From the start, he was determined to make his mark on the world, to leave a legacy that no one could ignore. But behind the glitzy facade, there was more to Diddy than the world ever saw. Born Sean Combs in Harlem, New York, Diddy grew up in an environment filled with both opportunity and hardship. His mother, Janice, was a schoolteacher who worked tirelessly to provide for him and his siblings. His father, Melvin, was a drug dealer who was killed when Diddy was just a toddler, leaving a young Sean to grow up in a rough neighborhood. Despite these challenges, Diddy's mother instilled in him a sense of resilience that would become the foundation of his life. As a teenager, Diddy was driven by a dream of greatness. He wasn't satisfied with just being another kid in the hood, he had bigger plans. He attended Howard University, where he studied business and briefly played football. But his true passion lay in the music industry. Diddy's eyes were always on the prize: fame, power, and influence. While at Howard, he landed an internship at Uptown Records, a position that would set the stage for everything to come. It didn't take long for Diddy's talents to shine through. At Uptown, he quickly rose through the ranks. He was known for his ability to spot talent and his relentless work ethic. By the early 1990s, he had started his own record label, Bad Boy Records. The success was almost immediate. He signed artists like the Notorious B.I.G., Mary J. Blige, and Faith Evans, each one helping to shape a new era of hip-hop and R&B. Bad Boy Records became synonymous with hitmaking, and Diddy became a mogul. But with success came immense pressure. Diddy was always in the spotlight, and the weight of the public eye often felt suffocating. As much as he craved success, he also knew that fame brought its own demons. Rumors about his personal life began to swirl, and as his career continued to climb, his relationships began to fray. One of the most significant relationships in Diddy's life was with Britney Spears. At one point, they were more than just colleagues, they were family. They had been through a lot together, both personally and professionally. Britney had been a vital part of the early days of Bad Boy, her pop influence helping the label expand its reach beyond hip-hop. They had spent countless hours together, working on music, strategizing their next big move. There was a genuine bond between them, a camaraderie that made them one of the most powerful duos in the entertainment world. But as with all things in the industry, nothing lasts forever. The pressures of their respective careers began to take their toll. Britney's rise to pop superstardom was meteoric, but it also came with its own set of struggles. The demands of the media, the constant scrutiny, and the toxic environment of Hollywood wore her down. And for Diddy, as his own empire expanded, the strain of managing both his professional life and personal demons became overwhelming. By the early 2000s, their relationship started to deteriorate. Britney's personal life became more and more of a public spectacle, and Diddy, who had always been the composed and polished figure in the spotlight, found himself at odds with her public image. She struggled with the pressures of fame, and Diddy, instead of helping, found himself distancing from her. There were moments of tension in the studio, disagreements over how their music should evolve, and, eventually, a dramatic falling out. But the true break came when Britney decided to leave Bad Boy. She wanted to forge her own path, free from the heavy expectations of being part of Diddy's empire. The split was not amicable. The industry buzzed with speculation, but neither party ever fully addressed the issues that led to their breakup. In the years that followed, Diddy continued to build his empire. He launched several successful business ventures, from clothing lines to alcohol brands, and maintained his dominance in the music industry. His reputation as a mogul grew even larger, but behind closed doors, cracks were beginning to show. The betrayal Diddy felt from Britney's departure still lingered. He'd never spoken much about it publicly, choosing instead to focus on his career. But there were rumors, whispers that he was angry, that he felt blindsided by her decision. Was it all about business? Or was there something deeper, something personal that had been broken between them? At the time, nobody knew. It was all just speculation. Meanwhile, Britney's career took a tumultuous turn. Her life became a whirlwind of personal struggles, mental health battles, and public breakdowns. She became a tabloid fixture, with every move she made scrutinized by the media. The public watched as Britney, once the epitome of pop perfection, fell from grace. But through all of it, the music world never quite let her go. Despite her personal struggles, Britney's legacy as a pop icon remained undeniable. Years passed, and Diddy's empire continued to grow. He managed to bounce back from the various controversies that had tried to take him down. But when news of Britney's upcoming testimony in the case against him surfaced, it was clear that the past was about to resurface in a way that no one could have predicted. The music industry had always been a game of power and survival, and Diddy had played it better than most. But now, in the court of public opinion, he was being dragged back into a past he had tried to leave behind. The courtroom drama was set to be a pivotal moment, one that could either redeem Diddy or destroy everything he had worked for. As the days leading up to the trial passed, the media attention grew. The whispers about what Britney would say intensified, and the question on everyone's mind was Diddy's past about to catch up with him? As Diddy stared at the media headlines flashing across his phone, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his own decisions. His entire life had been about power, success, and control. But now, the very things he had built were being called into question, all because of one former bandmate, one former friend. The truth was, Diddy had been here before, facing criticism, dealing with scandals, and surviving the highs and lows of the public eye. But this time, it felt different. This time, it wasn't just about his career, it was about his very identity. Could he overcome this? Could he prove that he was more than just the man the world saw in the headlines? And what about Britney? What had driven her to testify against him? Was there more to the story than anyone knew? As the world waited for the next chapter of this unfolding drama, Diddy knew one thing for certain: the next few weeks would determine his future, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days leading up to Britney's testimony were nothing short of agonizing for Diddy. He had lived through the ups and downs of the industry for decades, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The constant buzz of the media, the mounting pressure from his team, and the questions about his past were too much. In the quiet moments, Diddy found himself asking, how did it all go wrong? Diddy was a man of power, but power came with its own kind of isolation. Despite his vast network of friends, associates, and industry contacts, he had always kept his inner circle small. He trusted only a handful of people, and one of them was his longtime confidant, Khalil. They had been through everything together, the rise to fame, the turbulence of the music industry, and the betrayals that always seemed to come with it. But now, even Khalil was beginning to ask the questions Diddy didn't want to face. "Do you ever wonder if maybe, we've lost touch with what we built?" Khalil asked one night, sitting across from Diddy in his private office, the dim light from the city's skyline casting long shadows across the room. "I mean, all the money, the power, it's all great, but when it's all said and done, what do you really have? You've lost so many people along the way. Britney, she's just one of many." Diddy paused, his eyes narrowing. Lost people? That was a concept he had tried to ignore for years. The music business was cutthroat, but Diddy had always believed he could navigate it. But now, as he sat there in the stillness of his office, he felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The past, his decisions, his betrayals, and the sacrifices he had made, was finally coming back to haunt him. Many fans believe that Diddy's ruthless rise to the top was fueled by a need for control. He had managed to control every aspect of his empire, from his artists to his brands. But in his pursuit of success, he had stepped on people, ignored red flags, and abandoned relationships that meant something at one point. Britney was one of those relationships. He had let her slip away, even though deep down, he knew she was the one person who could have understood the pressure he was under. But their friendship, like everything else, was a casualty of the music industry. As the trial date approached, Diddy became increasingly reclusive. His legal team worked overtime to prepare for the worst, but even they couldn't predict what Britney would say in that courtroom. What if she revealed something even darker than what was already rumored? What if there was more to their fallout than anyone knew? The possibilities were terrifying. Rumors suggest. The tabloids speculated, hinting at a hidden truth behind the fractured relationship between Diddy and Britney. The whispers about how the music mogul had manipulated not just his artists, but also his closest allies, were gaining traction. Was it all part of the plan to build the bad boy empire, or was there something more sinister behind the scenes? Diddy had tried to brush off the rumors over the years. He told himself that this was just the price of fame, the price of being on top. But as the days ticked by and the courtroom drama drew nearer, he realized just how many people had already turned on him. His supporters were slowly fading, replaced by those who were eager to take him down. Was it possible that Britney, the woman he once considered a friend, had been holding on to secrets that would expose everything he had worked so hard to hide? The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. The media had descended in full force, cameras flashing as they captured every moment. Britney was sitting in the witness stand, calm but visibly tense. The world watched as the woman who had once been Diddy's closest ally prepared to share her side of the story. Diddy sat in the back of the courtroom, his jaw clenched. His legal team surrounded him, but the weight of the moment was crushing. This wasn't just another legal battle, it was a fight for his life. His legacy was at stake. The prosecution had called Britney to testify about her experiences working with Diddy, but what they didn't expect was the raw, emotional truth she was about to reveal. As she sat there on the stand, she looked directly at Diddy, her eyes betraying the years of pain that had festered beneath the surface. She wasn't the same girl who had once been part of his world, she had changed, and now, so had the world around her. "Diddy. I trusted you," Britney began, her voice cracking slightly as she recounted the early days of their collaboration. "But the closer I got to you, the more I realized that things weren't what they seemed. I believed in you, but you were using me." The words cut through the courtroom like a knife. The room was silent as Diddy's face twisted with emotion. He could feel the anger rising inside him, but he held it in check. This was his moment to either lose it all or stay composed. "What do you mean, using you, Miss Spears?" the attorney asked, pressing for clarification. Britney took a deep breath before continuing. "You promised me everything. You promised me a career, freedom. But all you did was trap me. You manipulated my image, controlled every move I made. You made me believe that I owed everything to you." The words were explosive. The courtroom was buzzing with shock and disbelief. The things Britney was saying were not just accusations, they were revelations. Was this really the same man who had built an empire? Could it be that Diddy, the business mogul, had been manipulating not just the music industry, but the very people who helped him rise to the top? The defense tried to discredit Britney's testimony, but her words had already planted a seed of doubt in the minds of those present. The public, who had once revered Diddy, was starting to question everything they had known about him. Many fans believed that Diddy's control over his artists had gone beyond what was acceptable in the industry. Was he more than just a businessman? Was he a puppet master, pulling the strings of those who trusted him most? Diddy sat frozen in his seat, the walls closing in around him. He could feel the weight of the public's gaze, the judgment in every pair of eyes that watched him. He had been prepared for a fight, but he wasn't prepared for the devastating truth Britney had just revealed. This was not just a betrayal, it was a public execution of his reputation. Is this who I really am? Diddy thought to himself, struggling to reconcile the man he believed he was with the image being painted by someone he once considered a friend. What if she's telling the truth? As the day came to a close, the courtroom was left in stunned silence. The drama was only beginning. Would Diddy be able to repair his shattered reputation, or would this testimony be the final blow? One thing was certain, the world would never look at him the same way again. The morning after Britney's testimony, Diddy woke up to a whirlwind of media coverage. The news was everywhere, on TV, social media, and the headlines of every major outlet. It was impossible to escape. His name was now synonymous with scandal, betrayal, and manipulation. The industry that had once been his kingdom was now turning its back on him, one by one. Diddy sat in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline. The usual bustle of the streets below felt distant, as if he were watching it from another world. He had built his empire on the backs of others, his artists, his business deals, his influence. But now, the very people who had once looked up to him were questioning his integrity. Was he the visionary mogul they once admired, or had he truly become the puppet master that Britney described? Diddy's phone buzzed relentlessly with messages and missed calls. His manager, his lawyers, and even some of his closest friends were all reaching out, urging him to respond, to clarify, to spin the narrative in his favor. But Diddy didn't feel like talking. He felt numb, trapped in his own thoughts, unable to see a way out. What could he say? How could he explain away Britney's accusations? The words were out there now, and once they were out, there was no taking them back. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. His mind drifted back to the early days of Bad Boy Records, to the excitement and passion of those first years. He had been on top of the world, he had created something that no one could replicate. He had been a part of a cultural revolution. He had helped shape the sound of an entire generation. But at what cost? Was the price of that success his soul? Was the price the very relationships he had once cherished? Diddy's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Khalil stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He had been Diddy's closest friend for years, someone who had seen him at his best and his worst. But even Khalil was starting to look at him differently now. "You okay, man?" Khalil asked, sitting across from Diddy. His voice was low, cautious. Diddy didn't answer immediately. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the endless stream of notifications, each one more damning than the last. Headlines like Diddy's dark side exposed and Britney Spears' shocking testimony could destroy Diddy's empire filled the screen. It felt like a nightmare, one that he couldn't wake up from. "Do I look okay?" Diddy finally said, his voice strained. "Everything I've worked for is crumbling in front of me, Khalil. I never thought it would go down like this." Khalil leaned forward, his gaze softening. "Look, I've known you for a long time. I know how hard you've worked to get here. But you've got to face the truth. Britney's not the only one who's been hurt along the way. There's a lot of people who feel like you've used them, Diddy. Not just in business, but, personally. You've burned bridges. You've pushed people aside. Now they're all coming back, and you're being forced to deal with it. Diddy clenched his fists, anger boiling beneath the surface. You think I don't know that? He snapped. You think I don't realize what I've done? But this is bigger than just me. This is my life's work. This is everything I've built. And now it's all falling apart because of one person's words. Khalil took a deep breath and stood up, walking over to the window. The city spread out before them, alive with energy, but for Diddy, it all felt like an illusion. He wasn't a mogul anymore, he was a man whose empire was on the verge of collapse. You've always been about control, Diddy, Khalil said, turning back toward him. But control doesn't work when the world's looking at you through a different lens. You can't spin this one. The truth is out there, and no matter how much you fight it, you can't hide from it. You have to decide who you want to be moving forward. The man who built an empire, or the man who destroyed it. The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Diddy didn't have an answer. He could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of his past choices suffocating him. His reputation was on the line, but it wasn't just about the public anymore. It was about something deeper. Something more personal. Could he live with himself if the truth about his actions, about who he truly was, came to light? The next morning, Diddy called a meeting with his legal team and his closest advisors. He had always been a man of action, and he needed a plan. But no one had answers. They could twist the narrative in the media, they could launch a counteroffensive, but there was no denying it, the public had already made up their mind. The more they dug into his past, the darker the picture became. Allegedly, he had been involved in countless shady dealings, from artist contracts that left performers with little to no royalties to accusations of using his power to control those around him. Rumors suggested that Diddy's rise to the top had been paved with manipulation, deceit, and betrayal. As the meeting went on, Diddy's frustration grew. I built this empire, he said, his voice growing louder. I gave these people everything. And now they're turning on me. His lawyer, a seasoned professional named Samantha, tried to calm him down. We know the truth, Diddy. But the truth doesn't always win in the court of public opinion. We have to control the narrative. That's the only way to survive this. Control the narrative? Diddy repeated, incredulously. It's too late for that. Britney's testimony has already painted me as a villain. What if she's right? What if all this time, I've been fooling myself? Samantha met his gaze steadily. What if she's not? We can't let emotions drive us. We have to focus on the facts. Focus on the bigger picture. But Diddy wasn't listening. His mind was already racing ahead, trying to piece together how he could fix everything. If there was a way out of this, he would find it. He had always found a way out before. But this time felt different. The cracks in his empire were becoming fissures, and he could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. Meanwhile, the media frenzy surrounding the trial reached new heights. The stories about Diddy's manipulative business practices and his fractured relationships were everywhere. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, a new bombshell dropped. A former artist signed to Bad Boy Records, one who had been a close friend of Diddy's early on, was about to testify in court. Allegedly, this artist would be spilling secrets about the inner workings of Bad Boy and how Diddy had used his power to control not only the music but the lives of those he worked with. What would Diddy do when more of his past came to light? Could he survive another round of revelations, or would this be the final blow? As the days passed and the trial dragged on, Diddy began to realize that it wasn't just about the courtroom anymore. It was about his soul, who he had become and what he had lost in the process. The truth was unraveling, piece by piece, and soon, there would be nowhere left to hide. The weight of the past few days was unbearable for Diddy. Every corner of his world felt like it was closing in, like the walls of his empire were crumbling, piece by piece. His lawyers had advised him to lay low, but that was easier said than done when every news outlet, every gossip column, was painting him as a villain. The headlines were relentless, and his once solid reputation was slipping through his fingers. The one thing Diddy had always prided himself on, control, was now the very thing he had lost. As the trial continued, more former associates came forward to speak about their experiences with Diddy. Allegedly, some of the biggest names in the industry were set to testify, recounting stories of manipulation, deceit, and shattered careers. The testimonies were like a tidal wave, each new revelation adding to the tidal force of suspicion that had already engulfed Diddy. But none of those revelations stung as much as the upcoming testimony of another former member of his team. Someone from the very beginning of his rise, the legendary producer, Quincy, who had been with him when Bad Boy was just a dream. The man who had helped shape Diddy's vision into what it had become. Quincy had seen it all. He had watched Diddy evolve from an ambitious, hungry talent scout into one of the most powerful moguls in the music industry. But somewhere along the way, something changed. And now, Quincy was prepared to speak out. "Diddy's not the man you all think he is," Quincy said during a press conference before the trial. "I've known him longer than most people, and I've seen the way he treats those closest to him. He's ruthless, always has been. But what he's done to his artists, to those who trusted him. I can't stay silent anymore." The words hit like a gut punch. It wasn't just Britney now. It was Quincy, someone Diddy had considered a mentor and a friend. Diddy's world seemed to collapse even further. The whispers, the rumors, the accusations, now they had a face. Now they had a voice. The courtroom became a battlefield as Quincy's testimony began. With each word, the image of Diddy that had been so carefully constructed began to crumble. He had always known that the price of fame was high, but now he was beginning to understand just how high that price really was. Quincy described in vivid detail how Diddy would manipulate his artists, making them believe they owed him their entire careers. He spoke of the way Diddy would pull strings behind the scenes, ensuring that no one could rise to prominence without his approval. The power he wielded was immense, and it had corrupted him, turning him into a man who would sacrifice friendships, loyalty, and integrity for the sake of success. Many fans believe that Quincy's words were the final nail in Diddy's coffin. The stories he shared painted a picture of a man who had stopped caring about the people around him, someone who had become so focused on his own empire that he had lost touch with the very essence of what had made him great in the first place. Diddy sat in the courtroom, stone-faced, as Quincy's testimony unfolded. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. "Is this who I've become?" he wondered. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, who called the shots. But now, as his past was exposed for the world to see, he couldn't help but question everything he had done. The prosecutor turned to Diddy after Quincy's testimony, asking him directly, "Mr. Combs, do you deny these allegations? Are you denying that you used your influence and power to control the lives and careers of those who worked for you?" Diddy remained silent for a moment. The eyes of the world were on him. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had spent his entire life building his empire, but now that empire was slipping away. He had made enemies, and now those enemies were speaking out. What if everything they were saying was true? What if the way he had treated his artists, the people who had helped him build everything, had been wrong all along? What if his ambition had blinded him to the human cost of his success? What if Monique actually said this? Diddy thought to himself, trying to compartmentalize the chaos swirling around him. Could it be possible that all the rumors were based in truth? The thought gnawed at him. He had always prided himself on being a master of control, but now it seemed like the only thing he was in control of was his own downfall. His legal team huddled around him, whispering in urgent tones, but Diddy didn't hear them. He was lost in thought. Where did I go wrong? Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy reached a boiling point. Paparazzi were camped outside, waiting for any shred of news, any glimpse of Diddy as he left the building. Social media was ablaze with reactions. People were speculating, gossiping, and passing judgment. The hashtags, #DiddyExposed, #BadBoyBroken, were trending, and the public was divided. Some were defending him, still clinging to the idea that Diddy had done nothing wrong. But many others, especially those who had once admired him, were turning their backs on the man who had shaped their music culture. But what did Diddy really have left now? Was there any way to rebuild his shattered reputation, or had he already burned too many bridges? The next few days passed in a blur. Diddy couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. He felt like a ghost in his own life, moving through the motions without truly existing. The constant media barrage, the whispers in the courtroom, the judgment. It was all-consuming. And then, just when he thought things couldn't get worse, another bombshell dropped. It was a recording, a conversation between Diddy and a former artist that had been leaked to the press. In the recording, Diddy was heard pressuring the artist into signing a deal that would have left them with minimal compensation and little control over their own career. The recording was raw, damning, and irrefutable. The public outcry was immediate. Diddy's past actions, which had always been whispered about in private circles, were now out in the open for the world to see. Allegedly, the recording was just the tip of the iceberg. Diddy's empire, the world he had spent years carefully constructing, was crumbling before his eyes. But this wasn't just a legal battle. This was a battle for his soul. And he was losing. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The leaks, the courtroom battles, the rumors. All of it had become too much for Diddy to handle. He had always been able to control the narrative before, but now, no matter how hard he tried, the truth seemed to slip through his fingers. Every effort to repair his shattered image only seemed to make things worse. Each new headline was another dagger in his heart. The public once adored him, but now, they were turning their backs on him one by one. Even those closest to him, the people who had been with him since the beginning, were starting to question everything they had believed about Diddy. Khalil, who had stood by him through thick and thin, was the first to reach out, again. This time, there was an urgency in his tone, an edge that Diddy had never heard before. "You need to talk, Diddy," Khalil said over the phone, his voice heavy with concern. "You can't keep hiding from this. The world wants answers, and right now, you're just sitting in that penthouse, watching it all fall apart." Diddy rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. He had lost sleep for days. The bright lights of his success had dimmed, and all that remained were the dark shadows of his past. His once unshakable confidence had been shattered by the truth, his own actions, his manipulation, and the countless sacrifices he had made on his rise to the top. But it wasn't just the media or the public who were turning against him. Even his family was starting to show signs of weariness. His son, Justin, had started to distance himself, no longer looking up to his father with the same admiration he once did. In an emotional conversation, Justin had finally opened up about how he felt abandoned, how he had watched his father prioritize his empire over his family for so long. "I just don't know who you are anymore, Dad," Justin had said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words had hit Diddy like a freight train. His son, his flesh and blood, was losing faith in him. His legacy, what he had worked so hard to build, was now being questioned not just by the world, but by the people he loved most. Diddy had always thought he was invincible. But now, everything felt fragile, like it could all shatter in an instant. He could feel himself slipping into a dark place, consumed by regret and self-doubt. Every choice he had made, every person he had hurt, seemed to come rushing back to him all at once. The trial was ongoing, and the testimonies from former artists and collaborators continued to pile up. The leaks were relentless. The recording of Diddy pressuring an artist into a poor contract had been just the beginning. The most shocking revelation, however, came from a woman who had worked as his personal assistant for years. She had testified that Diddy often made promises to artists, only to break them once they signed their contracts. She revealed how Diddy had manipulated his inner circle, promising fame and fortune, only to deliver betrayal and disappointment. But the most chilling detail was the way Diddy had allegedly controlled the careers of his artists, using them as pawns in his pursuit of more power and wealth. The personal assistant's testimony painted a picture of Diddy as a puppet master, one who used his charm and influence to lure people into his world, only to pull the strings from behind the scenes. Many fans believed that the personal assistant's testimony was the nail in the coffin. The public had already begun to view Diddy as a villain, but now it seemed like he had become a symbol of greed and exploitation. His empire, once a beacon of success, was now tainted with the blood of those he had used and discarded. At night, Diddy would walk the halls of his penthouse, unable to sleep. His mind raced with the things he could have done differently. He thought about the days when he had first started Bad Boy Records, when everything had felt fresh, when he had felt invincible. Back then, it had been all about the music, the vision, the culture. But somewhere along the way, the drive for success had overshadowed everything else. His ambition had become a monster, one that consumed him and those around him. He knew he had to make a choice, he couldn't keep running from the consequences. But as much as he wanted to fix things, to rebuild the bridges he had burned, a part of him felt like it was already too late. The damage had been done, and now, all that was left was the aftermath. It was late one evening when Diddy's lawyer, Samantha, came to visit him in his penthouse. She had been his legal counsel for years, and she had seen him through many battles. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't just his lawyer, she was his last lifeline. "Samantha, you don't have to sugarcoat it," Diddy said as soon as she entered the room. "I know what's coming. The world's already made up its mind. They think I'm a monster." Samantha sat down across from him, her face stern but empathetic. "Diddy, I know it feels like everything's falling apart, but we can still turn this around. We're not done yet." Diddy shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Turn it around? How? My empire is in ruins, and every artist I've worked with is either testifying against me or telling the world their stories. This isn't just a bad patch. This is the end. It's over." Samantha remained calm, though she knew how hard this was for him. "You don't have to fight this alone. You've been in control of so many things for so long, but right now, you need to focus on what really matters, making amends. The truth is ugly, Diddy. But you can still own it. You don't have to hide anymore. The world needs to see that you can take responsibility for what you've done." Diddy looked away, his eyes clouded with emotion. "I used to think that being at the top meant having everything. Power, fame, wealth. But now I realize that it's nothing if you don't have people who trust you. I've lost so much." Samantha leaned forward, her tone firm but supportive. "You haven't lost everything. You can't undo the past, but you can change the future. People are willing to give second chances. But you have to start by being honest with them, and with yourself." The words hit Diddy hard. For so long, he had been living in denial, pushing away the truth. But now, as the trial reached its climax and the world watched his every move, he realized that it was time for him to confront the damage he had caused. The facade of invincibility he had so carefully constructed was no longer enough to shield him from the consequences of his actions. The point of no return had arrived. And Diddy knew he had to face it head-on. That night, as he sat in the silence of his penthouse, Diddy made a decision. He would stop running. He would face the truth, no matter how painful. The man who had built his empire on manipulation and power would now have to rebuild himself on honesty and humility. But was it too late to save his career? Could he ever be forgiven? As he stared out the window, the lights of the city twinkling below, Diddy finally accepted that the world would never see him the same way again. The question now was whether he could live with that. The days that followed were a blur of late-night meetings, hasty phone calls, and media pressure that seemed to intensify with every passing hour. Diddy's legal team had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. But despite their best efforts, the world had already made its judgment. The leaks, the testimonies, the recordings, it was all too much. The public's perception of him had shifted dramatically, and no matter what he did, it felt like it was too late to turn back the clock. But as the trial entered its final phase, something inside Diddy stirred. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: vulnerability. He was used to being the one who controlled everything. Now, he was the one at the mercy of the court of public opinion. The power that had once been his greatest asset was now his greatest weakness. His empire was falling apart, and his personal life was in ruins. But still, the question lingered: was it too late for redemption? Samantha, his lawyer, called him into her office one afternoon. She had been with him through some of the most challenging battles of his career, but this time, there was an air of uncertainty even in her voice. "Diddy, I need to talk to you about the final part of this trial," Samantha said, her tone more serious than ever before. "We have one last shot. But it's going to take everything you have, everything you've got left, to make it work." Diddy sighed, rubbing his temples. He had heard this kind of talk before, but this time it felt different. He had no illusions about the odds anymore. He had watched as the people who had once been in his inner circle had turned against him. His friends, his mentors, even his family, they all seemed to be slipping away, one by one. And with each betrayal, the weight of his past mistakes felt heavier. "I know I've messed up," he said quietly, looking up at Samantha. "But I'm not sure I can fix this. Maybe I don't deserve to." Samantha shook her head. "No one's asking you to fix it overnight, Diddy. But you can start by facing the truth. Acknowledging the hurt you've caused. If you want a chance at redemption, it starts with honesty. You need to take responsibility for your actions in front of the world." Diddy had spent his entire life avoiding responsibility when it didn't suit him. He had built his empire by stepping on people, using them for his own gain. He had justified it by telling himself it was all for the greater good, that the end justified the means. But now, as he looked at Samantha, he understood that the time for excuses was over. The decision came the next morning, just before the final court hearing. Diddy made his way to the courthouse, the weight of what he was about to do weighing on him. He knew this was the point of no return. If he went through with it, there would be no turning back. The world would either accept his apology, or they would reject him completely. But he had to try. The media had already gathered outside, eager for any sign of drama. The cameras were trained on the courthouse entrance, ready to capture every detail of his arrival. As Diddy stepped out of the car, the flashbulbs exploded in his face. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but this time, it wasn't the thrill of fame that fueled him. It was something else, something deeper, something raw. He wasn't walking into that courthouse as the mogul, the icon, the celebrity. He was walking in as a man who had failed. A man who had caused pain, and now, he was ready to face it. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air felt suffocating, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for Diddy to make his move. His defense team was prepared, but the moment Diddy took the stand, the mood shifted. He could feel the eyes of the entire world on him. This wasn't just a courtroom, it was a stage, and he was the star of the most dramatic show of his life. Diddy cleared his throat before speaking, his voice low but steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and to everyone watching at home. I've spent the last few weeks listening to the testimonies, the accusations, and the stories from people I once called family. And what I've come to realize is that the people who are testifying against me aren't just telling their own stories, they're telling the truth. The truth about what I did, the truth about how I used my power, and the truth about how I hurt people. I can't deny it anymore." There was a hushed silence in the courtroom. Diddy took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the faces of those present. He felt vulnerable, exposed in a way he never had before. For years, he had built walls around himself, deflecting any criticism and maintaining control. But now, standing there, admitting his mistakes, he realized how little control he had over the situation. "I have wronged a lot of people," Diddy continued, his voice trembling slightly. "And I can't change the past. But I can tell you this, I'm not proud of who I've become. And I know I can't undo the damage I've caused. But if I'm going to have any hope of redemption, I need to take responsibility for everything I've done." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The weight of his words hung in the air. Diddy could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the enormity of the moment sinking in. He had made his choice, he had chosen to confront the truth, no matter how painful. Then, something unexpected happened. From the back of the courtroom, there was a movement. Diddy's eyes flicked toward the figure making their way toward the front. It was Justin, his son. Diddy hadn't expected him to be there. The last time they had spoken, their relationship had been strained. But now, here he was, walking toward him, his expression serious but not without a hint of compassion. Justin reached the stand and turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to speak," he said, his voice steady but emotional. The judge nodded, giving him permission to address the court. Justin turned to Diddy, locking eyes with him. "I don't know if what you said today changes anything," he said softly. "But I'm willing to listen. And maybe, just maybe, we can try to rebuild. It won't be easy, but we can start somewhere." Diddy's eyes filled with tears. In that moment, it felt like the smallest sliver of hope had emerged in the darkness. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he wasn't alone. His son, his flesh and blood, had extended a hand. And that, more than anything, gave him the strength to keep fighting. As the trial came to a close, the jury deliberated, but the world outside was already watching, waiting for the verdict. Diddy had done what he could. He had admitted his mistakes, shown remorse, and opened himself up to the possibility of change. Now, all he could do was hope that the world would allow him the chance to prove that redemption was possible. Whether or not the public would forgive him was still uncertain. But one thing was clear, Diddy wasn't giving up, not without a fight. And for the first time in years, he felt like he had a reason to hope. The days following Diddy's courtroom testimony were filled with intense scrutiny. The public had been divided. Some hailed him for his honesty, applauding his willingness to take responsibility for his actions. But others were less forgiving, accusing him of trying to manipulate the narrative, using his vulnerability as a shield. The media buzzed with hot takes, some sympathetic, others condemning. His social media accounts were flooded with messages, some offering support, others loaded with venom. Allegedly, Diddy's only admitting guilt because he knows he's losing everything, one tweet read. The real question is, will he pay the price for all the lives he's ruined? Another tweet popped up, what if Monique actually said this? Diddy just got caught up in his own web of lies. The mix of admiration and disdain left Diddy in a limbo that felt like a waiting game. He wasn't sure if he was moving toward redemption or just further down the path of his inevitable fall from grace. Every night, he would lie awake, the constant buzz of his phone reminding him of the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about his career, it was about who he had become, who he would be going forward, and whether there was any way to come back from the damage he had caused. The press conference that followed his testimony was scheduled for the next week. Diddy's legal team had planned it carefully, hoping to give him a platform to clarify his statements and share his commitment to changing the way he did business and interacted with the people he worked with. But Diddy knew that no matter what he said, the storm would continue to rage. The reputation he had spent decades building was in ruins, and the people who had helped him get there were now either silent or speaking out against him. His assistant, Lisa, was the first to remind him of something important. She had worked with him for years and knew him better than most. "Diddy," she said softly, as she passed him a cup of coffee, "whatever happens in that press conference, you can't pretend it's just going to go away. The road back to redemption isn't going to be easy. It's going to take time. You'll need to show real change, not just talk about it. Diddy nodded slowly, his gaze distant as he thought about what she had said. His thoughts kept returning to the same painful question: was it possible to change? Could he truly rebuild what he had destroyed? Before the press conference, Diddy called Khalil, his longtime friend and confidant. Khalil had always been the one person Diddy trusted without question. His voice on the other end of the line felt like a small comfort in the middle of the storm. "Bro, I'm lost," Diddy admitted, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "I've spent my whole life at the top, controlling everything. Now, it feels like I can't control anything anymore. People are turning on me, my son is trying to heal from the things I've done. Can I fix this?" Khalil's voice was calm, yet firm. "You've always been able to fight, Diddy. I know you've done things you regret, but if you want a real shot at redemption, it starts with your actions, not just your words. You have to show the world the real you, not the persona you've built. It won't be easy, but the first step is the hardest." Diddy took a deep breath, the weight of his friend's words sinking in. He knew Khalil was right. Words, no matter how sincere, would only go so far. The real work, of changing, of rebuilding relationships, would take time. But could he do it? The day of the press conference arrived, and Diddy stood in front of the cameras, his heart racing. He had been here before, facing the spotlight, always in control. But today was different. Today, he wasn't the charismatic mogul with all the answers. Today, he was a man trying to reclaim the pieces of a life that had unraveled in ways he couldn't have imagined. The room was packed with journalists, their eyes trained on him. Diddy walked to the podium, his hands slightly trembling. He had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times in his head, but now, as he stood before them, the words felt heavier than he had anticipated. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I want to start by saying thank you to everyone for being here today. I know the past few weeks have been difficult, for me, for my family, and for all the people who've supported me throughout my career. But the truth is, I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. And I can't undo that. I can't take back what I've done. But I can tell you that I am committed to making things right." The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. Diddy paused, collecting his thoughts. "I've spent my entire career building an empire. But I forgot something along the way. I forgot that the people I work with, the people I've built this empire with, are just as important as the work itself. I've taken advantage of relationships, I've hurt people I cared about, and I've let my ambition cloud my judgment." The reporters sat in rapt attention, scribbling down every word. Diddy's heart beat faster, his words tumbling out as if they had been trapped inside him for years. "I can't change the past, but I can work toward a future where I learn from my mistakes. I know I've lost the trust of many, and I can't ask for forgiveness. But what I can do is show you, through my actions, that I am committed to making things right. I want to rebuild, not just my career, but my life." The room was still. No one spoke, no one moved. Diddy could feel the weight of their judgment, the scrutiny in their eyes. But he stood firm, knowing that this was the moment where he had to prove he was capable of real change. After a few moments, a reporter raised their hand. "Mr. Combs," the voice asked, "do you think your apology is enough to heal the wounds you've caused? Do you think your empire can ever truly recover from all of this?" Diddy looked into the reporter's eyes, feeling the sting of their words. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But I'm willing to try. I can't guarantee that things will ever be the same. But I can promise you this, I'm not the same person I was before. I'm ready to change, and I hope that, in time, people will see that." The press conference ended, and Diddy left the room with his legal team, the weight of the moment still heavy on his shoulders. The world had heard his words, but what would the world do with them? Would they believe him? Or would they continue to tear him down? As he stepped into the waiting car, Diddy leaned back in his seat, feeling the pressure of the journey ahead. He knew that this was just the beginning. The road to redemption was long, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope, a faint glimmer that, maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild. And that was something worth fighting for. The months that followed were a whirlwind of public scrutiny, personal reflection, and gradual rebuilding. The media, which had once been Diddy's ally, now acted as a constant reminder of his fall from grace. Every headline felt like a slap in the face. Diddy's redemption, can he regain his throne? Is the mogul's apology genuine, or is it just a PR stunt? And, of course, the never-ending rumors. Allegedly, Diddy's businesses are on the brink of collapse. Many fans believe that Diddy has only apologized to save his fortune. Diddy's empire, once an unstoppable force in the entertainment industry, was now a crumbling monument. His companies were losing revenue, his relationships with major business partners were strained, and his reputation was beyond repair for many. The harshest blow came when a series of longtime collaborators, producers, artists, and managers, began distancing themselves from him. They had all seen what happened to others who crossed Diddy, some of them didn't want to be next. It was no longer about loyalty, it was about survival. Behind closed doors, Diddy's team scrambled to keep the business afloat. The legal battles were still ongoing, and his financial advisors were doing everything they could to salvage what remained of his fortune. But nothing could erase the stain of the past. The media and public had a long memory, and Diddy's legacy was tainted by the events of the past few months. The turning point came when he received a call from his son, Justin, a few weeks after the press conference. Their relationship had slowly begun to mend since the trial, but it wasn't easy. The scars from their past were deep, and the trust between them had been shattered. But Justin had surprised his father when he showed up at the courthouse, offering a small glimmer of hope. It had been a rare moment of vulnerability for both of them, and it had given Diddy a chance to begin the process of reconciliation with his family. "Dad, we need to talk," Justin said on the phone, his voice tense. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I know you've apologized, and I know you're trying to make things right, but I need you to understand something. What you did, it's not just about your career. It's about everything. It's about me. And it's about our family." Diddy felt his heart sink. This wasn't a conversation he was ready for. His son had every right to be angry with him, but hearing it so plainly made the weight of it all unbearable. "I get it," Diddy said, his voice rough. "I've hurt you, Justin. I've made mistakes, and I can't take that back. But I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm working on myself. I'm not the same man I was before." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Diddy's stomach twisted as he waited for his son's response. Finally, Justin spoke, his voice softer now. "I know you're trying, Dad. But it's not just about what you're doing now. It's about how we move forward. I need to know that you're not just doing this for your career. I need to know that you're doing this for us." Diddy's throat tightened as he fought back tears. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of his mistakes. It wasn't just his empire that he had destroyed. It was his family. His relationships. The trust of the people who mattered most. And that was something money and power couldn't fix. That conversation with Justin marked a shift for Diddy. He knew now that redemption was about more than just making amends in the public eye. It was about repairing the things that truly mattered, his family, his friends, and his integrity. The business side of things would come later. First, he needed to rebuild the broken relationships he had neglected for so long. Over the next few weeks, Diddy began the difficult process of reaching out to those he had hurt. He called his former collaborators, his old friends, even those who had left his side after the fallout. Some of them listened, but many others didn't. He had betrayed their trust, and no amount of apologies could fix that. But there were a few, like Khalil, who believed in him. Khalil had always been the voice of reason, the one person who never let Diddy's ego cloud his judgment. It was Khalil who encouraged Diddy to go deeper, to face the emotional wounds he had been avoiding for so long. "Your past isn't something you can just sweep under the rug," Khalil said one afternoon, sitting across from Diddy at his penthouse. "You've got to deal with it. If you want to heal, you've got to acknowledge the pain you've caused, not just to others, but to yourself." Diddy stared out of the window, his mind racing. For years, he had been the person everyone looked up to, the mogul, the mentor, the star. But now, as he sat there, stripped of his power and success, he realized that all the accolades in the world couldn't fill the emptiness inside him. The pressure to be perfect had consumed him, and in the process, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. It wasn't about rebuilding his empire. It wasn't about winning back the public's approval. It was about redemption in its truest form, personal growth, reconciliation, and healing. As Diddy took this new journey, the public response began to shift. Slowly but surely, people began to notice the changes in his actions. It wasn't enough to erase his past, but he was no longer the man who had used others for his own gain. He started doing charity work, not just for the headlines, but because he genuinely wanted to make a difference. He began to spend more time with his family, focusing on repairing his relationship with Justin and the rest of his loved ones. The media, too, began to soften. No longer was he just a target for jokes or criticism. "Diddy's doing the hard work of redemption," one headline read. "Mogul shows growth amid scandal." It wasn't a perfect recovery, his business empire would never be what it once was, but it was progress. But even as Diddy worked on repairing his personal life, the consequences of his past continued to linger. The scandal had left permanent scars on his career, and his reputation would never be fully restored. He had lost a lot, but he was gaining something far more valuable, a sense of peace. One evening, after a long day of meetings and reflection, Diddy sat in the quiet of his office. He stared at a photo of his younger self, standing at the height of his success. It was hard to reconcile that image with the man he was now, the man who had fallen, who had made mistakes but was trying, in his own way, to rise again. He looked at the photo for a long time, and for the first time in years, he smiled. It wasn't the arrogant smile of a man who thought he was invincible. It was the smile of a man who had learned the hard way that the path to redemption wasn't about regaining power. It was about becoming a better person, no matter how long it took. "Diddy, this is just the beginning," he whispered to himself. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to stop trying. Diddy stood at the window of his penthouse, staring out over the city below. The skyline stretched before him, a reminder of everything he had built. His empire, his dreams, his legacy. Yet, the view didn't give him the same sense of invincibility it once had. Now, it felt like a reflection of all the things he had lost, all the people he had hurt. The weight of it all settled deep in his chest, a constant reminder that redemption wasn't something that could be granted overnight. It had to be earned. The last few months had been nothing short of a roller coaster. He had faced the public's wrath, the betrayal of friends and colleagues, and the strain of working to repair the broken pieces of his life. But through it all, there was one thing that kept him going, the desire to become a better man. Not for the public, not for his career, but for himself and the people who still believed in him, his family, his true friends, and the ones who had stuck by him even when it seemed like everyone else had turned away. His son, Justin, had been a constant source of strength. Their relationship had grown stronger, even though it was far from perfect. Justin had been patient, offering his father the space to change but also holding him accountable. Their late-night talks about the future, about what it meant to rebuild trust, had become a lifeline for Diddy. Every time they spoke, he could hear the sincerity in Justin's voice, the belief that his father could change if he truly committed to it. Diddy had come to understand that his journey wasn't just about regaining what he had lost, it was about learning to live with the consequences of his past and finding peace in the process. But the journey wasn't just about his family, it was about everyone who had been hurt by his actions. Over the months, Diddy had reached out to people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some had accepted his apology, others, understandably, hadn't. But for the first time, he didn't feel entitled to their forgiveness. He knew it had to be earned through actions, not words. He had become involved in several community initiatives, including funding scholarships for at-risk youth and contributing to organizations focused on mental health awareness. But it wasn't just about writing a check. Diddy had attended events, spoken to students, and met with young people who had similar dreams and struggles that he once faced. Every time he interacted with them, he felt a small piece of himself healing. A glimpse of the man he could become. One of the most important moments of his journey came when he met with Britney Spears, the former member of his iconic band, who had testified against him in court. The public had painted her as the antagonist in his downfall, but Diddy had known, deep down, that there was a lot more to her side of the story. She had been through her own battles, her own struggles with fame, and the pressure of the public eye. When they sat down together for their first meeting, Diddy didn't expect an immediate reconciliation. He didn't even expect forgiveness. What he wanted was understanding. They spoke for hours, about the past, the mistakes they both had made, and how they had coped with the overwhelming weight of being in the spotlight. For the first time, Diddy heard Britney's side of the story in full. She had been silenced by the machine of fame for so long, and now, finally, she had a chance to speak her truth. "I don't expect you to understand everything right away," Britney told him softly, her voice calm yet tinged with pain. "But I wanted you to hear me out. It wasn't just the work, Diddy. It was the lies, the manipulation, it was everything that I had to deal with to get to this point." Diddy nodded, his heart heavy. He had seen the interviews, heard the rumors, but now, hearing it directly from Britney, he understood the depth of the scars she carried. They were not so different, after all. They had both been products of a broken system that took more than it gave. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sincere. "I didn't realize the damage I was causing. I didn't see it until it was too late. But I'm trying now. I'm doing the work. I'm committed to changing." Britney paused, looking at him with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "I know you're trying, Diddy. And for what it's worth, I believe you. But trust doesn't come easy. And neither does forgiveness." "I understand," Diddy replied quietly. "But I hope that, one day, you'll see that I've changed. I don't expect you to forgive me today, but I'm working on becoming someone who deserves that forgiveness." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. Then, with a faint smile, Britney finally spoke. "It's a start." A few weeks later, Diddy was in the studio, working on a new project. It wasn't a comeback album or a big business venture. It was something different, an album that was raw and personal, filled with the emotions and reflections he had experienced over the past few months. He had always used music as a form of expression, but this was unlike anything he had ever created before. This album was about honesty, vulnerability, and healing. As he listened to the tracks, he felt a deep sense of peace. He wasn't the same man who had stepped into that courtroom all those months ago. The road ahead was still uncertain, and he knew there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt. But for the first time, he wasn't chasing success or fame. He was chasing redemption, a redemption that didn't come with guarantees, but one that was worth fighting for. Diddy leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, reflecting on the long journey that had brought him here. His empire might have crumbled, and his public image might never fully recover. But he had found something far more valuable in the process, a sense of peace, a connection with his family, and a deeper understanding of himself. The road to redemption wasn't an easy one. But it was the only road worth walking. And as he stared out at the city lights once more, Diddy felt a glimmer of hope. The kind of hope that comes when you've faced your darkest moments and are finally starting to see the light again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough.